Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm Hugh inside Studio West for another 3 weeks, and I get to go back to the crazy Beltway. I'm glad I'm not going back to the crazy Manhattan now. The Cavaliers are probably going to play the Knicks in the first round, so maybe I wish I was in Manhattan covering Donald Trump. Former President Trump will be arraigned tomorrow in Manhattan, and that is TTD1. Today is TTD -1. That's what they called D-Day -1. Then it was D-Day. Then it was D-Day +1. Well, tomorrow is Trump trial. Trump trial D-Day. It's like the invasion of all the media in the world into Manhattan. And there really is only one story today. So my phone number is 1-800-520-1234. Do you know what's coming in terms of a circus of media coverage? Do you realize that? We are, I'm going to go quickly through the other news, and then we're going to talk about this Trump trial. Another round of severe storms expected today and tomorrow from Texas to Illinois. Biggest storm is going to be in Manhattan tomorrow. Mike Gallagher going to bring you Salem News Network live coverage from outside of the courthouse where the former president will be arraigned. Tony Blinken finally did something. He called his Russian counterpart to demand the release of Evan Gershkovich. Now, Evan Gershkovich got screwed by D.A. Bragg more than anybody. D.A. Bragg I haven't seen the indictment yet, so I'm going to have to wait to see that, to see if it's the garbage that people think it is. But what D.A. Bragg did is he denied this Wall Street Journal reporter taken hostage, Gershkovich, the attention he deserved over the weekend. Should have been a uniform front in American media denouncing the dictator Putin. And we can't get there because the Trump trial, show trial, I think, but I don't know. I haven't seen the indictment. We're going to have to wait and see if it's a show trial until after the indictment is unsealed. But I think it's going to be very bad. That journalist was reporting stories that needed to be told, according to the New York Times. I read his most recent story about the Russian economy and collapse. I knew then that Putin was in serious trouble. I thought they'd expel the journal, not take them hostage. But then again, President Biden trades hostages in bad deals. And so maybe they want more. A Putin pro-war blogger was killed in a suicide bombing attack inside of a St. Petersburg restaurant. The fellow thought someone was coming up to give him a statue of himself, and the statue it's the way they got the Lion of Afghanistan, the Lion of the North. Remember the day before 9/11 or the week before, the month before 9/11, a little bit hazy. The Taliban went up to, was it Sharif? The Lion of the Desert, the Lion of the North. We've got some friends here to see you, and they blew him up, and that's how the Afghan war really got underway before even 9/11. There's also a great story in the Telegraph about the National Health Service. And of course, OPEC cut production by 1 million barrels a day. So let me very quickly do our market report. And I'm not going to talk a lot about why oil costs so much today. But if you want to know why, it may be because a lot of ESG idiocy and propaganda has filtered into the minds of fund managers. And fund managers, they don't want static from the public. So they go out and they ESG up and they lose money for their shareholders. If you want the deal, go and find consumersresearch.org, great sponsor of the show. And I never talked to you about it in the first segment, so maybe this will be news to you. They are the site of record on ESG, and consumersresearch.org has been around for more than 100 years. We've got people divesting from our energy companies at a time when Saudi Arabia is cutting oil because of BlackRock and others who have imposed ESG on retirement funds like CalPERS and other big funds. Republicans in Capitol Hill passed a bill blocking these practices, and Joe Biden vetoed it. And so we're not going to get relief from that. And those energy stocks, which ought to be soaring, are not, because the anti-energy administration policies are fully in effect and fully strangling oil. And you may have a company, as well as some of the big energy companies practice ESG, but you might not know which of the funds in which you are invested practice ESG. Get the answers at consumersresearch.org. When I come back, we're going to get you ready to hear about what's coming up. Chris Christie was on This Weekend, summing it up. Cut number one. Or
Yes
not,
and no.
Governor.
Right? it does not surprise me that there are that many charges, because what you're talking about are financial transactions. And you can do it one of two ways as a prosecutor. You can bulk them all into one or two counts, or you can break them out into individual counts. And that's about your own decision in terms of how you want to present the proofs ultimately at trial and how you want the jury to consider it. So it doesn't surprise me that there's a lot. But I do think we're making a lot of presumptions based upon, media talk and talk from defense lawyers who, you got Joe Tacopina to admit this morning, he has no idea what's in the charging document. Right. He hasn't seen it. So I do think there may be some surprises in there for us, because the one thing I loved when I was the U.S. Attorney, George, was only I knew what I knew. And that's the secrecy of the grand jury system. And then you have to, as the prosecutor, put your proofs forward. And unlike what Nancy Pelosi said on Twitter this week, Donald Trump doesn't have to prove his innocence. In fact, the government must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he's guilty. So the number of charges doesn't really surprise me at all. But the fact that everyone's presuming they know what's in there when we don't, I think some people could be surprised.
That is the point, Chris Christie. I made it on Friday. I was on BBC Channel 4 radio on Friday morning, explaining to them that no, you really don't know. There isn't going to be violence. Nobody knows what's in this document, blah, blah, blah. The stuff that the tabloids have turned this into, Trump trial day -1. And Chris Christie said it, and I said it all day Friday. We have no idea what's in the charging document. We don't know if it's the stuff that we think is there that is nonsense, but we don't know. So all I know is if it goes to trial, Joe Tacopina is going to be one of the most famous people in the United States. And Trump will like that, by the way. The former president will like having an attorney who's not afraid to go on and defend and swing hard. I saw Lanny Davis yesterday. He's going to be a staple of cable. I mean, you're going to be so sick of this trial, Trump trial day -1. I'm already sick of it because it was 24/7 around the clock. When I read the headlines when we come back, and then we're going to jump into Joe Tacopina at the bottom of the hour. When I read the headlines, you'll realize it's like an avalanche is descending on American media, like a presidential campaign. Only they've got to go sign up experts everywhere who actually know what they're talking about. Most of the talking heads on television have no idea what a charging document, what an indictment is, whether it's a talking indictment, whether, what Chris Christie just told you, if they paid Stormy Daniels, for example, in 10 checks of $12,000 each, that's 10 charges plus 10 charges of conspiracy to conceal, and then maybe 10 charges on campaign finance election. It's just incredibly stupid to be guessing at this point. But I want to know what you think, because it is TTD -1. I'm live from Studio West. It's Hugh at 1-800. Welcome back, America. Ron DeSantis is a Yinzer, sort of. I'm not sure if he speaks Yinzer. His grandparents are from the Valley, the Mahoning Valley. So he speaks northeastern Ohio. He knows the land. But I don't know if he speaks Yinzer, because there are some of us who don't go over there. And then there are others of us who are basically in the Yinzer resistance in Ohio. Selena Zito is one of them, who crosses the border at night and comes over to Ohio to report on things and then dashes back to Yinzer land. Zito Selena on Twitter. Zito Selena on Twitter. She got a brand new story up. She was following Ron DeSantis around on the undeclared campaign trail this weekend. Good morning, Selena.
Good morning, Hugh. How are you today?
I'm terrific. Does the Florida governor speak Yinzer?
No, he does not. You have to remember that his mom is from Poland, which is right by Youngstown, Ohio.
Poland, Ohio, not Poland, near Vienna, Ohio. Yes.
Poland, Ohio. And
yes.
His uncle is a priest there. His aunt is a nun. So there are deep roots in that whole sort of Steel Valley area.
Do you have any idea which church his uncle pastored at? Was it St. Rose's in Girard? Do you have any idea?
I do, but I don't have it memorized.
You got to go write a story on that parish festival this summer. I'm not your editor, but they will have a parish festival wherever he would go as a kid with his grandparents, and they will all pretend to remember Ron DeSantis. So how'd he do in Pennsylvania?
Oh, he had an amazing event. So he was at the Pennsylvania Leadership Conference, which is an annual event that has basically the full breadth of the conservative populist coalition. You have establishment types, you have grassroots types, you have the conservative populists, sort of the new part of the conservative movement. It was sold out. I was told there was 800 people there. He had an incredibly enthusiastic response. He had a long speech. It was almost an hour long. He had several standing ovations. And
if I had a producer, I'd have that speech. If I had a producer, I'd have that speech. But did he mention, and I got to ask you so we don't run out of time now, then go back and tell me, did Trump trial D, TTD -1, today is Trump trial day -1, tomorrow's Trump trial day. Did Trump's trial come up from the Florida governor?
He said that, yes, he said it was politically motivated. But he talked, and I think there in the story, there's this moment where this woman says, what I really liked about the speech is he says we all the time. He makes us feel part of whatever that is accomplished. You rarely heard him say I. And I thought that was really important because in 2016, that was that thing with Trump that was aspirational, part of something bigger than themselves. And something that he's moved away from. It's more about I. And
you
I
mean
think
Trump has?
Yeah,
you mean Donald Trump has moved away from we?
Right. Whereas DeSantis, if you just go back and look at all of his speeches, it's always we. He never pretends that he is the only person that has accomplished the things that they have accomplished, whether it was clean up from Hurricane Ian, or anything else in the state legislature. And so I think that was really interesting. And the other really interesting thing was there are plenty of people there with MAGA hats on, and they were standing up just as much as everyone else applauding him.
Selena, do you agree with me? Public opinion polls right now don't mean a thing because it's just name ID. And the fact that he's got 25 to 30% name ID this early on is pretty remarkable. But I'm curious again. The Trump coalition is allegedly reforming around outrage over the indictment pending tomorrow. Did you hear or see that this weekend?
No, I think obviously voters are smart. You are able to separate your sentiment about what people think is political maneuvering and outrage by the left and still being able to look at someone else as your candidate. Voters can walk and chew gum at the same time. They can be unhappy with what's happening with Trump. I think you will see a momentary bump, but I also think it's going to be really hard to maintain that sort of martyrdom. Did I say that right? Around a candidacy.
Oh, it's going to be quite the carnival, though. I mean, it's like that summer carnival where in Ron DeSantis' grandparents' parents. Selena, you remember OJ. How do you think on a scale of 1 to 10, with OJ being 1, where will we be in over coverage of the Trump trial?
Past that. We'll be like a million. It's just
we're going to blow the chart is not going to work, is it?
No, the chart's not going to work. And it's not going to be good for voters. I think it's going to have, one of the people there said to me, look, this is going to be overblown. And people don't understand that just because this happened to him, we are still sticking with him. Because this is about us. It's not about him. This movement was never about him. This coalition was formed. He was the result of it. He did not.
Good luck preaching that gospel to legacy media. They'll never believe it, and they don't want to believe it because it's better to paint him as Snidely Whiplash. Selena Zito, good to see you this morning. Everything Selena's at selenadito.com. If you go to my Twitter handle, you'll find her latest column and a link to her Twitter account, which is Zito Selena. Now, next hour, Vivek Ramaswamy joins me, as well as Sam Metz from the AP. Wrote an amazing story on Chinese influence operations in Utah. Author, entrepreneur Jan Janura about his new book, Turning Small Talk into Big Talk. But I close this hour with Josh Kroshauer because Josh, of course, knows politics as well as anybody inside the Beltway. Josh, I'm trying to prepare the audience for a tsunami of Trump trial coverage. This is Trump trial day -1. So it's TDD -1. Tomorrow's TDD. Wednesday is TDD +1. How many? What will we get to? If there, do you have any estimate of how long we will be in Trump trial mode?
Yeah, maybe until 2024. I mean, this is the O.J. Simpson trial for politics, and as I wrote in Axios this morning, Trump is sucking the media oxygen out of the room already. It's going to make it more challenging for Ron DeSantis or anyone else, for that matter, to get their ideas heard during this trial, during the whole criminal phase post indictment. And look, you look at the polling, and I always caution that polls are just a snapshot in time, and we'll see where the legal cases go. But boy, this is not just Trump was already leading and gaining his advantage over DeSantis before the indictment was laid down. The two new polls that came out over the weekend show, at least one of them shows Trump with a commanding 30, 40 point lead over DeSantis post indictment. So, that doesn't mean he's a stronger general election candidate. It just means we're going to be seeing the freak show for the next, I would say, for the foreseeable future, Hugh. And look,
Josh, are you old enough to remember OJ?
I am. Yeah, I was in high school at the time.
Okay, so F. Lee Bailey, Johnny Cochran, Chris, Judge Ito, the whole that's going to happen here, right?
Yep. No, absolutely. Absolutely. It's going to be a circus. It's going to drive up every bit of media attention. I mean, look, it wasn't that long ago, Hugh, that all the cable news channels were not really covering Trump to the extent, even to the extent of a presidential candidate. And now we're going to the opposite level. We're going back to 2015, 2016, though, instead of looking at the rallies, we're going to be seeing Trump 24/7 on trial.
And Josh, let me ask you this. Do you think the former president can remain expressionless? I assume that it's New York court and therefore state court, so that it will be televised. Do you think he can conceal expressions from his faces when witnesses testify?
Well, no, I don't. I think it's going to be a spectacle. And look, and it's going to be the trial of the century if it gets to that point. And,
the trial of every century. We've never had a trial of a president before.
Absolutely. I mean, this is going to be the one and only news story, and it's going to concur with presidential race going on, where he could potentially be the nominee. So, we're headed. We're already there, and we're headed into even more unprecedented territory.
I got to ask you, who do you think wins in the media? Every cable channel wins, every radio show wins, but there will be a new generation of F. Lee Bailey's, Johnny Cochran's, and the whole Chris Darden's. They'll all be out there. Joe Tacopina has already made it very clear he's very good at this. Lanny Davis is back, like a boomerang from the 90s. And I like Lanny. Lanny's a friend. What do you think? Who's going to emerge as the new talking head on TV? Because Jeff Toobin's not coming back. They're not going to bring him back to CNN for obvious reasons. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't have any names in mind, but you're right, Hugh, that the OJ trial spawned a whole generation of legal talking heads. I think Greta Van Susteren made a name for herself during the OJ trial. And
good memory. Yes, she did.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be a whole. We kind of saw this during the rush. I mean, we saw this during the legal. Everyone's debating all the legal cases that Trump faced during his presidency, and this is only going to supercharge that dynamic. And there's going to be a whole generation of legal talking heads that emerge from the Trump trial.
Now, what's going to be very, very interesting, you know how the former president does focus on TV because he knows that cable makes the image. Do you think Tacopina is up to this?
I saw him on the Sunday shows. He seemed a little bit in over his head, to be honest. So I think Trump. Look at the legal people that Trump has associated himself with. He had some really good folks on retainer, but the Michael Cohens of the world, Tacopina has represented celebrities like A-Rod, I believe, but I'm not sure if he's up to this challenge.
Well, that's actually why I think he might be good. If you've dealt with New York media, because there are two media in Manhattan, there's going to be the national media and then there's going to be the New York media, and Tacopina knows because of the A-Rod trial how to do that, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, and you're right. There's sort of the media, the legal representatives, the lawyers that work the press, and then the folks that actually work on the case. So yeah, I mean, there's going to be probably that same dynamic with this situation.
And I am looking for who's going to be designated experts on Fox, MSNBC, and CNN, because each of them are going to need to build credibility in a talking head. Do you have anyone in mind yet in the lawyering world who that will be?
Oh boy, I don't. And it's funny because I'm so immersed in the politics. A lot of the legal conversation it's on an entirely separate track. But I've seen a lot of those familiar faces we saw during the Trump presidency talking about his legal situation.
Yeah, and by the way, unless they know anything about con law or criminal law, just don't listen to them. And former United States attorneys are partisans. That's how you get to be a United States attorney. They're not very good at being commentators here, but I will follow everything Josh Kraushaar watches because he's watching the political. We've gotten the tsunami warning. Today is the tsunami warning. It's coming. The Trump trial tsunami is coming. Trump trial day -1, America, and hour number 3 of my first show of the new indictment era coming up. Stay tuned. And minutes ago, Brett Baier of Fox News reported that multiple U.S. Secret Service agents connected to former President Donald Trump have been subpoenaed and are expected to testify before a D.C. grand jury probably on Friday. The former president is in deep legal trouble, and that is obscuring what ought to have been maybe the most talked about article. Evan Gershkovich getting arrested by Putin is a big deal, but so is the AP story on the Chinese Communist Party targeting Utah. Now, I've been the recipient of defensive briefings before, and this AP story is a defensive briefing for not only everyone in Utah, but everyone in state and local government. One of the authors of the AP report I'm talking about, Sam Metz, joins me now. Good morning, Sam. Welcome to the Hugh Hewitt Show. Thank you for joining me.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Now, a defensive briefing is when you let somebody know they're the subject of an influence operation by organized crime or by a foreign government. Yours was perhaps the most comprehensive defensive briefing I've ever seen from the reporter point of view. You told everyone Utah is in the crosshairs of the CCP and General Secretary Xi. Would you explain what the article is about?
You from here?
There you go, Sam. Talk to me. Go ahead. Tell me, what did the Utahns figure out? Were they surprised by your reporting?
I think that there were some of the examples that we had were seemingly innocuous when thought of in a vacuum, but I think people were surprised to look at a broader picture and see how these fit into Chinese subnational influence campaign. In terms of the LDS Church, I think the interesting thing that illustrates is that China can really tailor its influence and propaganda efforts to a specific state, regardless of how small it is, and regardless of how seemingly small the ties between that state and China are. So I think we know this is happening in bigger states, but this is an example of China tailoring its strategy to a smaller state like Utah, using the predominant faith, the Church of Jesus Christ.
Did they have a Confucius Institute in Utah?
Yeah, so we had 2 Confucius Institutes in Utah, at the University of Utah, which is in the process of shutting theirs down, and Southern Utah University. There were some China hawks in the state house who put forth bills to try to close these Confucius Institutes, and they came up against a lot of headway when these bills reached the state Senate. And what they told us is they didn't really understand why. Ultimately, one of the lawmakers, Representative Candace Perucci, was able to broaden her legislation to be a ban on foreign funding for higher education from states included in the NDAA. But it took a few years for that to pass.
Did they ever get inside the first presidency where the prophet is accompanied by 2 advisors in the first presidency of the LDS, or inside the apostles, the quorum of 12? Did they penetrate the LDS to that level?
I couldn't speak to that. Most of our story is based on state public records. So we do see examples of the state Senate president meeting with one of these men with ties to what experts say are front groups on the same day that he meets with officials from the LDS Church. But I don't know if they how they have related to the first presidency or the Quorum of the 12 Apostles.
Has the LDS, and I have great admiration for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints' organization, their mission focus, their desire to train their missionaries and get them everywhere, and their language institute. They know how to do it. But they also might be naive a bit about how deeply, deeply evil the CCP is. Were you shocked, or were you or pleasantly surprised by the depth of knowledge of the CCP in Utah?
Was I shocked or was I pleasantly surprised? I think that one thing that really stood out in the reporting is that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has, throughout their entire history, been very active in speaking out against religious persecution. They're very pro-refugee, and they take some positions that I think really surprise people in a lot of ways. And China was kind of an exception in some ways when it came to how they speak about religious persecution, and that surprised us.
I am not, because again, their number one job, as they understand it, I'm not now, nor have I ever been a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, is conversion. That's their deal. And you can't convert unless you can knock on a door. And I'm sure, do they have any LDS missionaries in China yet?
No, there are LDS missionaries in Taiwan. There are not LDS missionaries in China. And they're trying to build a temple in Shanghai, but there is no temple in Shanghai.
That's never going to happen. Do they know that's never going to happen, or at least not going to happen in my lifetime and yours?
Yeah, well, that'll be interesting to see. It's definitely a stated goal. They've announced a temple in Shanghai under strict restrictions, so we'll see if it gets built.
That'll be the most bugged Mormon temple ever. And there were some, it's just going to. So 1 minute, Sam, are you staying on this story? You're going to go state by state? I pray that you are. Every state needs a wake-up call. Are you staying on this story?
I think we'll have more coming.
That's ambiguous. Del Wilbur he hadn't told you already, become Woodward and Bernstein? He hadn't told you that? What's wrong with Del?
There's definitely a lot of good stuff to be covering at the state and local government level. In terms of China, in terms of TikTok bans, there's definitely good stuff to be covering.
When you talk to Secretary Pompeo next, or O'Brien, they will tell you, this has been going on for 5 years, but Sam Metz and his colleagues at AP are the first to actually document what the CCP is doing to American government at the state and local level. And congratulations, Sam, for doing that. Coming right back. I have been listening to you. You gave the first statement on the Trump trial. It was very good from the back of a car. You were the first one. Can you repeat your reaction briefly to the indictment that will be unsealed tomorrow?
Well, look, pending what we see in the indictment when it is unsealed, based on the facts that we do know, Hugh, this appears to be a politicized persecution through prosecution. Alvin Bragg ran for his position on a campaign promise of investigating Donald Trump. I would say that when a prosecutor delivers on a campaign promise to go after a specific individual, especially when that individual is the leader of the opposition party to the ruling party that's in power, that is big trouble for the country. And I just think we're skating on thin ice as a nation right now. Trust in our institutions, including in the police state, is at an all-time low. This takes us to a potential breaking point unless we turn this around. And I say this as somebody who's running. It might be more convenient for candidates like me if Trump were compromised or not even in the race. But this is not how we should decide who runs the country. We should decide who runs the country by putting it to the people of this country who get to decide who we elect to actually run the U.S. government. This is not the way it's supposed to be done.
Now, Vivek Ramaswamy, I like to establish a few foundational subjects when I talk to people about the law. You're not a lawyer. Have you ever been arrested?
I am a lawyer. I went to Yale Law School, but I've never practiced. You're correct about that. I have not been arrested.
Right. Okay. And not even as a kid for goofy stuff?
Not even as a kid. I'll give my parents credit for that. Not even as a kid for goofy stuff. I was a nerdy academic guy. Yeah.
Have you ever been sued in your individual capacity for anything?
I have not.
Have your companies ever been sued?
Not to my knowledge that I can remember. No, actually. It's actually kind of an amazing thing. Yeah.
That is an amazing thing, because my next question was going to be, what did your lawyers advise you to do when your companies got sued? Because anyone who's as successful as you are And you've been very successful. In fact, would you tell people how you grew your business success? Because you're not a practicing lawyer. So how did you get to your position?
Yeah, so look, I began my career as a biotech investor, did that for 7 years, went to law school at the same time while I kept my job. After that, I went on to found a biotech company. My whole career has been challenging orthodoxies. I challenged the orthodoxy of big pharma by focusing on a lot of disease areas that they had ignored, by incentivizing scientists to actually make money rather than to actually be managerial bureaucrats, which is what they are in big pharma. That was the backbone of building a multi-billion-dollar business. 5 of the drugs I worked on are FDA-approved medicines today, from life-saving therapies in kids to a therapy for prostate cancer. After that, I decided to challenge the cultural orthodoxy in big business by writing Woke Inc., which exposed the politicization of corporate America. And then I went on to found another business to take on the politicization of corporate America called Strive, which competes against BlackRock by offering an alternative vision to the ESG movement. So suffice to say, Hugh, I've built my career and success in business by challenging a lot of those incumbents in that status quo, as I'm trying to do in government now.
But you've avoided the courts through that whole process. I mean, I'm retired from the active practice of law, but for 30 years, I never ran into a company that wasn't sued repeatedly by somebody for something, including Big Pharma must have had their eyes on some of your patents. That you've never had to do any of that. That's truly shocking.
Yeah, I mean, look, Hugh, were there some minor things that I'm not aware of at my level as CEO? Maybe, but really, to tell you the truth, I don't think so. And one of the things that I've been built, the businesses that I've run on, is on a culture of really doing everything the right way. Now I'm running for president. I'll be higher profile. I fully expect and am ready for people to shoot arrows wherever they will. But I think that one of the things that's true about my leadership style, whether in business or whether in government, and this relates to even the topic of actually fixing the administrative police state, how to go further than Trump ever did, is if you're doing it on a solid moral foundation, if you're doing it on solid first principles, you can do it uncompromisingly without compromise if you yourself are not compromised. It's actually one of the aspects of my leadership style in business that I intend to bring to the government, because if you're going to do things like I've pledged to do, like reforming the administrative state, shutting down certain administrative agencies, you better believe there's going to be backlash. But doing it on solid, principled footing is what will allow me to see this through, as Reagan did, in fact, but to go further than even Trump did. That's part of the premise of my candidacy.
You know, one of the intriguing things, Vivek, about your candidacy is that you know what the administrative state is, probably because you had to go through the FDA process so many times.
Oh, yeah.
And the administrative state is ubiquitous and it's ominous for our future. But I want to go back to the Trump trial for a moment. And, it's TTD -1, Trump trial day -1. Tomorrow's Trump trial day, and then Wednesday will be TDD +1. Are you going to bring on an advisor to the campaign to interpret for you the events in the criminal trial of Donald Trump?
I will be working with some former law professors of mine who I trust to actually delve through this in detail, because I think there are dimensions to this, Hugh, that are pretty interesting that, I think other candidates may skim the surface on. One of the areas I'm going to be looking for in that indictment when it's unsealed, and by the way, I think there's no excuse for it not to have been unsealed already.
You're right.
But if
You're right.
there's just no excuse for it. It's inexcusable for the country, but it will be unsealed, they say, tomorrow. One of the things I'll be looking for is the nexus between the state law and the federal law. Keep in mind, if these leaks and New York Times reports are to be believed, this is expired under the statute of limitations under New York law and for falsifying business records. And further is at most a misdemeanor. So to charge it as a felony, they have to establish a linkage to a federal campaign finance law violation. That's interesting for a number of reasons. But Hugh, I'm running for president of the United States. One reason it's interesting to me is that may open up the possibility of a presidential pardon in a case where it otherwise would not be open under state law. U.S. presidents cannot pardon people who are convicted under state law. But if that state prosecution is based on a nexus to the federal law, it depends. They say there's 22 counts. That's one of the things I'm going to be scrutinizing very carefully. And Hugh, I will be using advisors, but if you've read some of my work in my books or my scholarship, I've dabbled as a legal scholar in my own right too, and did all right in my capacity before
I have
the business world again. But
I like to tell people with the team. I've been teaching con law for almost 30 years, but I very rarely comment on criminal procedure, because while it is a subset of con law, crim pro is crim pro. I had Jerry Israel for crim pro, one of the great geniuses of the 80s, along with Yale Kamazar at Michigan. Did you take crim pro at Yale?
I did not. I took criminal law and constitutional law. I did not take crim pro, which is a great regret of mine.
Well, it's a fascinating court. I've only done one criminal trial, but who's going to be the former Yale faculty member that you referenced? Who's going to help you on this stuff?
I'm going to be respectful of them. I have no problem saying it, but I think that they would prefer to stay behind the limelight as they're advising me. But they're former professors of mine at Yale, one of whom I actually spoke to yesterday about this very issue that I'm talking to you about here. So if they're fine with it, I'll name them. But out of respect to them, I haven't asked them for that.
Smart. Good answer. Let me turn to Silicon Valley Bank. Predicate question. Did you have any exposure to the SVB collapse?
I did not have any personal exposure that I know of. I have a vast investment portfolio that an independent person manages for me, so I wouldn't be surprised if I did. One of the things I want to do, Hugh, is to take my self-interest out of it, which is unfortunately what most other investors who were commenting on this did not do. One of the most interesting things about the Silicon Valley bailout, it wasn't a bailout of Silicon Valley Bank, but it was a bailout of the Silicon Valley firms that were depositors at Silicon Valley Bank, is that there wasn't a single prominent person who was commenting in favor of that bailout that did not have personal ties to it. And many of the financiers who did not, from Cliff Asness to Ken Griffin, who did not have as meaningful or any of personal ties, were the ones, I think, quite sensibly saying that this should not have been bailed out. So it's amazing how self-interest does filter what business people say. Part of why I've separated myself from that is I want to be speaking on the basis of first principles as someone who's running this country. But to answer your question narrowly, I don't have any exposure that I knew of, but it's independently.
Have you asked your financial advisor yet if you did? Because, for example, Roku, I use that only as an example because it's the obvious one. They had $500 million on deposit at SVB, which means that $499,750,000 was at risk. And so I assume Roku was working the lobbyist chain. You didn't have anything like that kind of exposure to your knowledge, correct?
That's correct. And I think it is a staggering risk failure on behalf of the chief financial officer, even the CEO of Roku, to put that much money in one bank that itself is a smaller bank that's taking this kind of risk. That's rash. It's irresponsible. And the fact that they and others like them were bailed out in the name of helping American small businesses, this is laughable lexicon adopted by Silicon Valley to lobby for this bailout, really creates this kind of corporate moral hazard, telling these corporations, startup tech firms, that they don't have to look at counterparty risk, don't have to look at risk because the government will be there in their hour of need. I think this was a shameful example of cronyism, what we call historically crony capitalism. I don't even use the word capitalism because there's nothing capitalistic about it. This is a failure of the system, and I think it is a shame that the U.S. government actually came to the rescue of this level of corporate irresponsibility.
Did any of your friends in the Valley, I got text. I've got nothing to do with the Biden administration. They didn't even return my phone call. So there's nothing I can do to help them on this. But I got lobbied to stop complaining about the SVB make good by people I've never met. Did you get any of that? Because you're a high profile investor?
Countless. I mean, in the weekend before that bailout, it was a part of an influence operation. I was flooded with texts, phone calls. These are with large prospective donors, many of whom. So then I wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal that Sunday, making the case against a bailout, hoping to influence the outcome for the better. Unfortunately, Janet Yellen acted a few hours later. But on the wake of that, I heard from many of them that they were prospective donors that would now be not supporting me because they were disappointed in the posture I took. They were throwing spaghetti against the wall, saying it was going to reduce American competitiveness versus China, knowing that I care about that issue, to saying that, you know what, this was going to create a bank run on Monday in America if Silicon Valley Bank specifically wasn't bailed out. After years of arguing that Silicon Valley Bank should be subject to looser risk standards precisely because they were not a source of systemic risk. So this is hypocrisy. I personally lost large dollar donors over it, but that is okay, Hugh, because I refuse. I'm in this race in part because I refuse to be somebody else's circus monkey. I've put an 8-figure sum of my own wealth into this campaign precisely because I don't want to be somebody else's stooge. But it is clear to me that Silicon Valley is indeed, many of those people believe that they can pull the strings. In some ways,
I want to come back to that in a moment. But you raised donors. individual donors across 50 states may or may not be a metric for the RNC's hurdle to get onto the debate stage. How is your individual donor pile looking, and is it distributed across 50 states? Do you think you'll be able to meet any of those metrics?
I think we will meet those metrics with flying colors at this point. I can tell you that, which is basically that we have donors from all 50 states, and we actually crossed 15,000 donors just 5 weeks into the campaign. So this is shattering a lot of other norms, even for a new campaign, even for any campaign. And actually, one of the funny facts was about 30% of our donors, at least at the moment we crossed 10,000, we had these numbers, were first-time donors to the GOP. Normally, that number is somewhere in the range of 2 to 5% at most. So we're really shattering norms here. Frankly, Hugh, I think a lot of other candidates, I think I'm going to say this, are going to have, even some of the professional politicians looking at entering this, are going to have trouble hitting tens of thousands of donors. We've already crossed 15,000 5 weeks into this. And so our sense is that will be an important part of the criteria for the debate stage. And at this point, we're confident we're going to meet the debate stage criteria with flying colors.
That's very impressive. For the benefit of the audience who doesn't know, getting individual donors is a lot more difficult than getting mega donors or having personal wealth, which you both have. Let me ask you a couple of SVB questions now. When they argued systemic failure, I was not in a position to say yay or nay because I'm not a banker. I know there was a lot of risk that went uninsured and that there were chief risk officers who were either not at the wheel or asleep. If it had gone down, do you think it would have been systemic bank failure?
No, I do not. And I made a very clear case in the Wall Street Journal why Silicon Valley Bank was different than the other banks. But here's the further point. Even if there were systemic risks to the system, the way to handle that would have been to let Silicon Valley Bank and its depositors suffer the consequences of their decisions while prospectively applying the same set of rules to everybody else to shore up confidence in the banking system. And I laid that out in detail in the Wall Street Journal and elsewhere. What the folks in Silicon Valley did was they played a trick. They wanted to purposefully conflate the Silicon Valley Bank situation with the rest of the banking system, because the more likely they could make a bank run on the rest of America, the more likely it was that they could get their bailout. So it was a perverse incentive for them to engage in that kind of fear-mongering. And the irony is the way a bank run starts is through panic. So they had an incentive to create the very fear, to create the appearance of a risk that otherwise would not have materialized were it not for that fear-mongering. I hope that makes sense to you, Hugh, in terms of what
Oh, it does. That's why I got lobbied, because I had a Twitter account and I have a media platform. So they lobbied everybody, they being anyone with risk in SVB who did not want to lose money, lobbied everyone they know. There will be a book written, Vivek Ramaswamy, about those 48 hours, from the time Joe Biden said no bailout to the time that Janet Yellen delivered one. And what you just told me, that you got handled by major donors, that's part of the background to this.
That is absolutely an essence of the story. You know what? I gave up those donors, but you know what? At the end of the day, it is going to be a bottom-up grassroots uprising. We prefer $1 and $5 donors from thousands. People can go to Vivek2024.com, VIVEK 2024.com, to learn more about where I stand. And if it's $1 or $5, what we're building here is a grassroots movement to supplement the major personal investment that I've made in this campaign. And I'm pleased to say,
Vivek, I got to get a few more basic questions before I run out of time. How much time do I have, Adam? 30 seconds. Ever use drugs?
No.
What did you major in Harvard?
I was biology, molecular biology, with the secondary in economics.
And who is your senior campaign strategist?
Rex Elsas and Ben Yoho of the strategy group right here in my backyard in Columbus, Ohio. We're shoulder to shoulder every day.
You told me that last time. They're still there. Good to know that. Vivek, keep coming back. Vivek, I'm getting it right slowly. Vivek2024.com. Thank you, Vivek.
Thank you, Hugh.